Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today we're grappling with a really fundamental question. How do language, literature, and political power, how do they all interact to fundamentally shape our moral perception?
And to do that, we're looking at a massive, and I mean a truly massive collection of work. We're diving into the collected essays of George Orwell. Now, I know what you're thinking. I can almost hear the high school flashback starting already.
Oh, yeah.
You're thinking 1984, you're thinking Animal Farm, you're thinking about pigs walking on two legs and Big Brother watching you from a telescreen. But we aren't really talking about the novels today, are we?
No, we're not. And, it's crucial to make that distinction right up front. The novels are brilliant, of course, but they're the fictional application of his ideas. They're the nightmares, if you will.
The end product.
Exactly. The essays, on the other hand, they're the blueprints. They're the diagnostic manual. If you really want to understand the mechanics of how political systems rely on corrupted language and manufactured narratives to sustain themselves, you don't look at Winston Smith. You have to look at Orwell's analysis of the English language itself.
It's almost like the essays are the source code for the novels. Like 1984 is the user interface, the thing we all interact with, but the essays are the back-end server where all the actual processing is happening.
That is a perfect way to frame it. It really is. And that's why this collection matters so much beyond just literary criticism. We aren't here to debate whether Orwell was a good writer in some aesthetic sense, though he certainly was.
Right.
We're here because this collection reveals the mechanics of how political orthodoxy acts almost like a virus. It attacks the very capability for individual thought. It's a study in cognitive systems.
Okay, so just to clarify our mission for this deep dive, we are not doing a biography of George Orwell, born Eric Blair. We aren't doing a nostalgic look back at 1940s England with the tea rationing and the Blitz.
No.
We are analyzing language as a system of power.
Correct. We're trying to look at the machinery of perception itself.
Okay, so let's unpack the man just for a moment to set the stage. Because I think a lot of people have this image of Orwell as this, this saintly, prophetic figure who is just sort of born knowing the truth. But when you read the intro to this collection, especially the one by Bernard Crick, you realize that George Orwell was almost a character, a persona that Eric Blair created.
He was, and that distinction is absolutely vital. Eric Blair was an Eton-educated man. He served in the imperial police in Burma. He lived in abject poverty in Paris and London. He fought in the Spanish Civil War.
And these aren't just, trivia points for his biography.
No, not at all. These are the data inputs for his system. Think about it. In Burma, he was the oppressor. He was the policeman enforcing British rule, and he hated it. In Paris, he was the oppressed, the one at the bottom, washing dishes in a filthy hotel basement.
And then in Spain, he was a soldier watching his own side, the political left, betray one another, sometimes murderously.
So his hatred of authority, his hatred of totalitarianism, wasn't theoretical. It wasn't something he picked up in a political science lecture at a university.
It was visceral. It was in his bones.
It was earned. And you have to remember the historical context here. These essays were written across a timeline that includes the rise of fascism, the Spanish Civil War, the Second World War, and the very dawn of the Cold War.
It's the ultimate crisis context.
It is. He was writing at a time when liberalism, in the classical sense, was being completely destroyed. And totalitarianism, and this is key, coming from both the right and the left, was demanding a total, unconditional surrender of the mind.
And to fight that, he adopted this persona you mentioned, right? The plain style. Crick talks about this in the introduction.
Yes.
Orwell wasn't writing for the ivory tower intellectuals. He deliberately adopted the persona of the plain, blunt, honest man because he wanted to reach the common reader. It feels so deliberate. It's almost like he was weaponizing simplicity against complexity.
That's a key part of his strategy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He had this deep-seated belief that the common man, someone grounded in physical reality who works with their hands, who isn't caught up in abstract theory, was maybe the last best hope for civilization.
But there's a tension there, isn't there? Because he himself was an intellectual.
A huge tension. He lists his own motives for writing in the essay Why I Write, and he's brutally honest. He admits to sheer egoism, the desire to seem clever. He admits to aesthetic enthusiasm, the love of words. But then he lists historical impulse and, crucially, political purpose.
The desire to push the world in a certain direction. I love that definition. It's so active. It's not just about having an opinion. It's about altering the trajectory of reality itself.
And the tension, the thing that makes Orwell so fascinating to study as a system, is his lifelong struggle to fuse that political purpose and artistic purpose into one whole. He famously said he felt he couldn't write readable work unless he struggled to efface his own personality.
To get out of the way of the story.
Exactly. But at the same time, his starting point was always, in his words, partisanship and a sense of injustice. So he was trying to be this objective camera in a world that was screaming at him to choose a side.
So if we take all of that, the man, the context, the mission, what does it all mean for us? If we strip away the 1940s context, what is the central thesis we're working with today?
If we distill these thousands and thousands of pages down to a single core argument, central thesis, it is this. The degradation of language is both a symptom and a tool of political domination.
Okay, say that again. A symptom and a tool.
A symptom and a tool. If we cannot speak clearly, we cannot think clearly, and if we cannot think clearly, we are easily controlled.
That is actually, hang on, that's genuinely terrifying. If that's true, it means that when we use bad grammar or slang or just lazy jargon, we aren't just communicating poorly, we are literally damaging our own ability to process reality.
You're degrading your own cognitive hardware, yes.
Wow. Okay, let's break down how that happens. This seems like a good place to start with the core systems analysis.
Right.
This brings us to our first major insight, which comes from his most famous essay, Politics and the English Language.
Right.
He describes the cycle, this feedback loop.
The feedback loop of stupidity, that's what I call it.
I love that title. But walk me through the mechanics. Is it just as simple as people talk bad, so they think bad, or is there more to it?
It's more insidious than that. Orwell argues that language isn't just some natural growth, like a tree. It's an instrument. It's a tool.
A tool we can shape.
And that can shape us. The cycle goes like this. We have foolish thoughts, maybe because we're tired, or we're lazy, or we're just biased about something. Because our thoughts are foolish and vague, our language becomes ugly and inaccurate. We reach for a ready-made phrase, a cliché, instead of finding a specific word.
Okay, so I have a vague thought, so I use a vague phrase, something like, we need to synergize our core assets going forward.
Perfect example. But then, and this is the absolute kicker, the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to continue having foolish thoughts.
Ah, so it's not a one-way street.
Not at all. Once you have the phrase, synergize our assets or strategic realignment in your head, you stop thinking about what those words actually mean in physical reality. You stop picturing the specific people getting fired or the specific departments getting merged. The language acts as a pre-cut groove that your thoughts just slide into, completely bypassing your critical faculties.
So it's a downward spiral. Bad thinking leads to bad talking, which in turn leads to even worse thinking. It's like a muddy road. The more you drive in the existing ruts, the deeper those ruts get, until you literally can't steer out of them, even if you wanted to.
Precisely. And Orwell's point, which is so important, is that this is a reversible process. But it requires conscious, sometimes painful effort.
You have to actively fight it.
You do, because the system of modern political writing, and he was writing in the 1940s, but my God, this applies to today, is designed to make foolish thought automatic. It's designed to allow you to speak or to write without ever actually engaging your brain.
So when a politician stands up and gives a 5-minute speech that sounds incredibly professional but says absolutely nothing of substance, that's not an accident. That's the system working as intended.
It is the machine functioning perfectly. We're talking about the deliberate removal of concrete imagery from language. If you can speak without creating a picture in the listener's mind, you can say almost anything without triggering their moral alarm bells.
Okay, we have to come back to that, the specific mechanism of how that works.
We will. But first, we have to look at what drives this need for vague language in the first place. Why does this system exist? And this brings us to the second insight from his essay, Notes on Nationalism.
This was a huge aha moment for me reading through these. I think most people, myself included, hear the word nationalism and we immediately think patriotism. In modern conversation, we use them almost interchangeably.
We do.
You see a flag on a porch, you say, oh, they're nationalistic or they're patriotic. But Orwell drops a bomb here. He says they are not only different, they are actually opposites.
They are functionally different operating systems for the mind. It's a critical distinction. Orwell defines patriotism as a devotion to a specific place or a particular way of life. It's defensive in nature. Meaning a patriot loves their home, their town, their specific local customs. But, and this is the critical part, they have no real desire to force that way of life on other people. A patriot says, I love this valley and I will defend it.
It's a live and let live mentality. I like my tea this way, you drink your coffee that way, and we're cool.
Exactly. Nationalism, on the other hand, is completely inseparable from the desire for power. The nationalist doesn't just love their chosen unit. They want to secure more power and more prestige for it constantly. And they want to submerge their own individuality into that unit.
And that unit doesn't have to be a country, right? That was the part that really surprised me. It's not just about nations.
No, and that's the real brilliance of the essay. That's what makes it so relevant today. A nation, in this Orwellian sense, can be a country, sure, but it can also be the Catholic Church. It can be the proletariat. It can be a specific political party. It can be a race. It is any unit where the individual classifies all of humanity like insects, good versus bad, us versus them.
So if I'm a diehard for a specific political ideology, to the point where I think everyone on the other side is fundamentally evil, I'm a nationalist in the Orwellian sense, even if I hate the actual concept of nations.
Exactly right. You have classified the world into us and them. And once you have made that classification, something profound and dangerous happens to your perception of the world. Orwell calls it becoming indifferent to reality.
This is maybe the scariest mechanism in the whole collection for me. Break this down. How can a person be indifferent to reality? I mean, reality is, well, it's reality. It's right there in front of you.
Not for the nationalist. The nationalist mind becomes capable of the most immense, almost unbelievable dishonesty. They can see an atrocity committed by their own side. We're talking torture, bombing civilians, imprisonment without trial, and they do not feel it. It's like a moral anesthesia kicks in.
But if the other side does it,
But if the enemy commits the exact same act, they react with the most profound and righteous indignation.
he gives that example of the British Tories and their view of the USSR, right? How the same actions like imprisonment or execution are judged in completely different moral universes based solely on who did them.
It's a variable reality. Facts, as we understand them, do not exist for the true nationalist. Only power and prestige exist. If a fact is inconvenient to the prestige of the unit, say, your side committed a war crime, that fact is suppressed or denied or explained away. Not just publicly, but internally. You delete it from your own mind.
And if a fact is helpful, it's exaggerated.
Endlessly. So truth becomes a servant to the tribe, and history becomes fluid, something to be rewritten as needed.
This leads perfectly into the third insight, which is about who is most susceptible to this kind of thinking. You'd think the common man, the less educated person, would be the easiest to trick. The stereotype is always the mob, right?
Right, the gullible masses.
But Orwell says no. He talks about this phenomenon of transferred nationalism, and he specifically points the finger at the intellectuals.
Yes, this connects to his essay Inside the Whale as well, and it's a deeply counterintuitive point. Orwell observed this strange phenomenon in the 1930s, where English intellectuals who felt ashamed of their own country or were greatly disillusioned with British imperialism didn't stop being nationalists.
Yeah.
They transferred that deep-seated need for power worship onto something else.
They needed a new fatherland to believe in.
Precisely. For many in that era, it was Stalin's Russia. For others, it was the Catholic Church. Orwell argues that the intellectual is often more vulnerable to totalitarian thinking than the common man.
Why? Because they're unmoored.
Exactly. Unmoored from what? From physical reality. The common man, in Orwell's view, has what he calls a secular pietism.
A love of ordinary things.
A love of ordinary things. Suet puddings, bad comic postcards, the surface of the earth. These physical, undeniable realities act as an anchor against absurdity. The intellectual, who lives primarily in the world of abstract ideas, can talk themselves into justifying almost anything.
They can write what Orwell calls that slavish or boastful rubbish about foreign dictators.
Yes, because they don't have that grounding in these sane but stupid physical world. Their reality is made of words, so it can be rearranged with words.
That is just fascinating. So high intelligence isn't a shield against propaganda. Sometimes it's actually a conductor for it, because you have the mental capacity to build these incredibly complex arguments to defend the utterly indefensible.
It allows for more complex mental gymnastics.
Mm.
If you're a simple person and you see a man being shot in the head, you think that is a bad thing.
Mm.
If you were a highly theoretical intellectual, you might be able to say, well, historically speaking, this liquidation of unreliable elements is a regrettable but necessary step for the acceleration of the dialectic towards utopia.
And you've just rationalized a murder.
Which brings us directly to the fourth insight, the defense of the indefensible. This is back in politics in the English language. Orwell states, very bluntly, that most political speech is largely the defense of things that, if you describe them clearly and honestly, would be horrifying to most people.
So how do you do it? How do you defend the indefensible? How do you defend the continuance of British rule in India? How do you defend the Russian purges? How do you defend dropping an atom bomb on a city? If you just state the facts, we are killing thousands of people to maintain our power, most decent people would recoil in horror.
The systemic solution, the tool you use, is euphemism and vagueness.
Right.
Orwell gives these chilling, unforgettable examples. If you bomb defenseless villages from the air, burn the huts, and drive the inhabitants out into the countryside, you don't call it bombing and terrorizing. You call it pacification.
A pacification. It
I'm
sounds
sure
so calm. It sounds like you're giving a crying baby a pacifier. It literally implies the creation of peace.
That's the trick. It steals the word peace to describe an act of war.
Yeah.
If you rob peasants of their farms and send them trudging along the roads with nothing, you call it transfer of population or rectification of frontiers.
And if you lock people up for years without a trial or you shoot them in the back of the neck,
That's elimination of unreliable elements.
it's like the words fall like soft snow, blurring the outlines of the dead bodies. That's Orwell's image, isn't it?
Yes. The phraseology is needed specifically to name things without calling up mental pictures of them. It's a tool for bypassing the visual cortex. If you can stop the reader or the listener from seeing a mental image of a crying child or a burning house, you can stop them from having a moral reaction. You short-circuit their conscience.
That is the core of the perception crisis right there. We are being systematically blinded by the very words we use to describe the world. Okay, so insight number 5. We've talked about the feedback loop, about nationalism, about euphemism. What about the writer, the person who's actually trying to tell the truth in the middle of all this mess? Orwell talks about the writer's split self in the essay Writers and Leviathan.
This is his prescription, really. His advice on how to survive as an honest person in a dishonest time. He argues that in a deeply political age, to accept a political discipline, to blindly toe a party line, is fundamentally incompatible with literary integrity. He says very bluntly, a bought mind is a spoiled mind.
But he also says you can't just opt out of politics. He acknowledges that we live in a political age. You can't just go hide in a hole and pretend it's not happening.
And that's the dilemma, isn't it? If you stay out, you're either irrelevant or you're complicit through your silence. If you join in, you risk becoming a hack, a propagandist.
So what's the solution?
The solution he proposes is a split self, a kind of managed schizophrenia.
Yeah.
You must act as a citizen. You canvass, you fight in wars, you vote, you do the dirty work of politics that is sometimes necessary. But you must keep a part of yourself, the writer self, the observer self, completely inviolate.
Like a gorilla on the flank. I love that phrase.
Yes. You must be able to recognize that while a certain political action might be necessary for your side to win, you refuse to lie about it in print. You refuse to use the party dialect. You maintain your individual perception of reality, even while you're acting as part of a collective group. It's an incredibly difficult mental discipline.
It sounds absolutely exhausting. It means you're constantly at war with yourself, double-checking your own loyalty versus your own perception.
It is exhausting. But the alternative, in Orwell's view, is the death of the creative faculty. If you sell your mind to a party, you lose the ability to see the world as it actually is. You just see what the party tells you to see.
Okay, let's zoom out. We've got these incredibly powerful insights. Let's do what we do on this channel and actually map the system. We want to see how these individual pieces fit together into a functioning, self-perpetuating machine. Let's start with the actors. Who are the key players in Orwell's model of this system?
Okay, first you have the politician or the bureaucrat. Their primary role in this system is to use language to conceal reality. Orwell has this haunting image he describes of watching a speaker on a platform. The light catches his glasses and turns them into blank discs. He stops looking like a human and turns into a machine.
I can picture that so clearly. The eyes just disappear and it's just this mouth-moving, emitting sound.
And he says the speaker isn't even really speaking. He's just emitting noises. Bestial atrocities, iron heel, blood-stained tyranny. He's just gumming together long strips of pre-chewed words. The politician is the primary generator of the noise.
Okay, so after the politician, you have the intellectual or the writer.
The intellectual is the vulnerable node in the network. They're the ones who are most susceptible to transferred nationalism. They're terrified of being labeled with the wrong word, bourgeois, reactionary, fascist. They constantly struggle between their desire for honesty and their need for acceptance or power within a group.
So they're the ones who write the sophisticated justifications for the politician's noise.
They provide the intellectual cover. Then you have the common man,
The buffer.
the buffer, the sane but stupid buffer, as Orwell puts it. And again, he uses stupid not as an insult, but to mean untheoretical. They are grounded in physical reality. They are less susceptible to the wild, abstract swings of ideology because they're fundamentally worried about rent and the weather and suet puddings.
They're the resistance, the anchor.
They're the anchor. Their common sense is the resistance against the windy lies of the intelligentsia. And finally, you have the media, or as Orwell called them, the press lords. Deeply dishonest in his view, living off advertisements. And he notes that they exercise this very clever indirect censorship. It's not that they necessarily need to be bribed by the government, they just instinctively know what not to print to keep the machine running smoothly and keep their advertisers happy.
Okay, so those are the actors. What are the incentives driving their behavior? Why does everyone play along with this system?
Well, the first and most powerful incentive is conformity, just a deep primal fear of labels. In Orwell's time, being called a fascist or a Trotskyist could absolutely ruin your life. Today, the specific labels are different, but the mechanism of fear is identical.
Nobody wants to be cast out of the tribe.
Nobody. Then there's a simpler incentive, mental ease. It is simply easier to use a prefabricated phrase than to think of an original one.
It saves you the trouble of actually thinking. If I just use a stock phrase, I don't have to hunt for the right word or construct a new sentence. It's low-energy communication.
Exactly. To say, in my opinion, it is a not unjustifiable assumption that is just easier on the brain than saying I think. And finally, the big one, power preservation. Euphemisms allow brutal policies to continue without a major public outcry. If the public truly visualized what pacification actually meant in terms of human suffering, the policy might have to stop. The vague language protects the power structure from accountability.
And the narratives that hold all this together.
There are a few key ones. First, inevitability, the idea that history is on our side, that this outcome is destined to happen anyway, so don't fight it. Second, moral necessity. This is the idea that the end justifies the means, that we have to do these bad things to achieve a good outcome.
Necessary murder.
Necessary murder, exactly. And third, binary thinking. You are either with us or you are against us. There is no middle ground, no nuance allowed.
So, if we trace the full feedback loop through this map, you have corrupted language, which leads to an anesthetized brain. No mental images are being formed. This leads to political conformity. We just repeat the party line like a chant. This, in turn, leads to strengthened authority atrocities get accepted as a sad necessity. And then the authority produces even more corrupted language to justify its actions.
And the cycle tightens and tightens.
So why is honest language so systematically discouraged? Why can't we just, break the chain by deciding to speak clearly?
Because sincerity is the mortal enemy of political conformity. It's that simple. If you think clearly, you cannot remain orthodox for long. To write in plain, vigorous, honest language requires fearless thinking. And fearless thinking inevitably eventually leads to heresy. You will notice a fact that contradicts the party line. And if you dare to speak that fact clearly, you become an enemy of the system.
That is a bleak but an incredibly lucid map of the system. I want to anchor this in the text itself. We have a directive to pull a few specific quotes and translate them directly into systems language.
Let's do it. Let's start with one of my favorites, the packet of aspirins. This is from Politics and the English Language.
Okay, the quote is, phrases like a not unjustifiable assumption, leaves much to be desired, would serve no good purpose, a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, are a continuous temptation, a packet of aspirins always at one's elbow.
Okay, so the system translation here is abstraction as mental numbing. These phrases don't add meaning, they actively subtract it. They exist to stop the writer from having to think and the reader from having to visualize. They are a drug that numbs the pain of having to be precise.
And for a real-world anchor for that one,
Look no further than institutional jargon, modern corporate or bureaucratic non-apologies. When a company has a massive data breach or lays off thousands of people, what do they say? Mistakes were made. We are looking into the matter. We are currently undergoing a strategic realignment.
right sizing. That's the one that always gets me. It implies that before the company was the wrong size and firing 5,000 people isn't a human tragedy, it's just a mathematical correction.
Exactly. These phrases are the aspirin. They exist to numb the reality of someone losing their health insurance and their livelihood. It is language used specifically to avoid the pain of specific meaning.
Okay, here's another one. The variable atrocity. This is from Notes on Nationalism.
This one is absolutely crucial for understanding modern media.
The quote is, "The Liberal News Chronicle published, as an example of shocking barbarity, photographs of Russians hanged by the Germans, and then a year or two later published with warm approval almost exactly similar photographs of Germans hanged by the Russians."
The system translation here is moral inversion and selective perception. The act itself, the brutal act of hanging a human being until they are dead, has no intrinsic moral content to the nationalist mind. The moral content is determined entirely, 100%, by who is doing the hanging and who is being hanged.
The real-world anchor here feels almost too obvious. It's political media narratives.
Every single day. Look at how similar political tactics, executive orders, filibusters, public protests are framed by different media outlets. When our side does it, it's heroic resistance or decisive leadership. When their side does the exact same thing, it's dangerous obstructionism or abuse of power. The reality of the action itself is completely ignored. Only the actor, the tribe, matters.
Chilling. Okay, last one. The bot mind. This is from Writers and Leviathan.
This is the warning.
The quote, "A bot mind is a spoiled mind. Unless spontaneity enters at some point or another, literary creation is impossible, and language itself becomes ossified."
The system translation for this is orthodoxy as necrosis. Necrosis is the medical term for tissue death. Totalitarian pressure doesn't just silence dissent, it biologically kills the creative faculty. It enforces a prefabricated structure on thought that makes real creation impossible. If you buy the party line, you sell your ability to create anything new. Your mind ossifies. It turns to bone.
Let's bring this right up to the present day. We've touched on this a few times, but let's go deeper. How do we see Orwell's prefabricated henhouse of language operating right now in our world?
Well, just listen to modern political messaging. It's almost entirely composed of pre-tested sound bites that are gummed together. Political speech often feels like a machine algorithm is just predicting the next most likely word. We see the dummy speaker phenomenon that Orwell described all the time. When a politician repeats a talking point for the 10th time, are they conscious? Are they thinking? Or are they just a vessel for the party dialect?
And it's not just in politics, is it? It's in our institutions, the rise of the technocracy.
Yes. Orwell despised what he called pretentious diction, using fancy words to make simple ideas sound profound. Words like phenomenon, element, objective, liquidate. Today, we see the complete dominance of technocratic language in governance and economics. We hide raw human realities behind data-driven abstractions. We talk about collateral damage instead of dead civilians, kinetic action instead of bombing, negative externalities instead of a polluted river that gives people cancer.
Negative externalities is a classic example, isn't it? It just sounds like a minor footnote in a spreadsheet.
Precisely. It makes policy seem inevitable and scientific inexorable, to use one of Orwell's most hated words, rather than a choice made by human beings that has real, often brutal effects on other human beings.
And then there's the cultural pressure to conform. Orwell wrote about the terror of being labeled bourgeois or reactionary.
Today, the specific labels are different, but the structure of fear is absolutely identical. There's a clear structural recurrence of self-censorship. Writers, thinkers, artists, even just regular people on social media adopt the dominant orthodoxy of their group, not always because they deeply believe it, but out of a rational fear of losing their income or their social standing.
And that leads to what Orwell called the Meccano set style of writing. You're not creating something new, you're just bolting together safe, pre-approved phrases to build a sentence that won't get you in trouble.
And the result of that is communication that is boring, lifeless, and at its core, dishonest.
This brings us right back to the core theme of our channel, crisis in perception. How does this deep dive into Orwell connect directly to that?
Orwell is the ultimate case study in systems versus individual morality. He shows with devastating clarity that individual morality, things like common decency, truthfulness, the basic ability to see a toad and call it a toad, is under constant systemic attack by the systems of nationalism and power politics. The system requires the suppression of the individual conscience in order to function.
And it proves that our perception is fundamentally shaped by the language we have available to us.
We can only perceive what we have words for. If our words are all dying metaphors or euphemisms, then our perception of reality itself becomes blurry and distorted. We literally cannot see the defenseless village that's on fire beneath the comfortable abstract word pacification. The crisis is that we are losing the very tools, clear, concrete language required to perceive reality accurately.
And that is what makes truth so dangerous to power.
Totalitarianism, in any form, demands the continuous alteration of the past and present. The independent recorder of reality, the honest writer, the historian, the investigative journalist, the scientist, is the greatest possible threat to that system because they insist that facts exist regardless of the party line.
So we've unpacked the system. We've seen the actors, the incentives, the feedback loops. We've seen the traps. Where does that leave us? What's the final takeaway here?
I think Orwell's essays help us see that language is not a passive vehicle for our thoughts. It's a battlefield. And political power relies on our confusion. It relies on us being mentally asleep while we speak, just using the ready-made phrases that are handed to us.
But he does offer a defense. There is a way to resist.
Yes. And surprisingly, it's not some grand counter-ideology. It's not a new atriism. It's what we mentioned earlier, the secular pietism of the ordinary.
The toads. We have to come back to the toads.
We have to talk about the toads. In his wonderful essay, Some Thoughts on the Common Toad, Orwell writes about the simple, profound joy of seeing nature emerge in spring. He talks about his deep love for solid objects, for useless information, for the surface of the earth.
Why is that a defense? It sounds a little like escapism, just ignoring the big problems to look at a toad.
It's the absolute opposite of escapism. It is a radical return to objective reality. A toad is a toad. A hanging is a hanging. A stone is a stone. By focusing on the concrete and the undeniable, you are performing the ultimate act of defense against the abstract lies of power. Power wants you to live in a world of symbols and abstractions where war is peace. But if you look at a real wound or a real flower or a suet pudding, you are anchoring yourself in a reality that power cannot easily manipulate or redefine.
So it's about grounding yourself in the physical world to protect the integrity of your mental world.
Exactly. Orwell's resistance wasn't just political. It was, at its heart, a resistance of perception. He simply refused to stop seeing what was right there in front of his face.
That brings us to our final reflection. We always like to leave you with a question, something to mull over.
Orwell warned that we can anesthetize a portion of our brains by letting a ready-made phrase enter our minds. So here is the question for you.
In the last hour, how many phrases did you use, or for that matter, did we use, that were truly your own? And how many were simply strips of words handed to you by your newsfeed, your political tribe, or your workplace?
If language corrupts thought, how much of your current worldview is actually yours?
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.